Okay. We're preparing to live stream. So far, so good.
Like we're at the rocket launch.
Yes, I know. Did we make it? Yes. Okay. So we are now live, and so welcome back. So I'm here with Becky McKinnell once again of I Bet Creative to talk e-commerce and branding, and this is our last in our 6-week series of live YouTube office hours. And we had some technical difficulties last week, but we have overcome them this week and we are live once again. So today we're going to talk about using data in e-commerce and how that affects your ability to build an effective brand. And so I know, Becky, one of the topics we were starting to talk about a little bit in preparation for this is just that for a lot of companies, that one of the things about being in a digital space that's a bonus is that you have a lot of data, and that's also tends to be a negative for some companies too, where you can almost get lost in a sea of data and not even know what you should be looking at or how you're judging success. And so especially for small businesses who don't have somebody that they can fully dedicate to parse data, how do companies make sense of all of the data that they're finding in e-commerce? How do you guys help companies figure out what are the things that they should focus on?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think like what makes e-commerce so exciting is that there is so much data and you can measure everything, and feels like you can always be dialing things in to be a little bit better or get more performance. So I would say from the beginning, the first thing that companies need to do is make sure that they're collecting good data, good quality data that's filtering out any spam bots and also filtering out the people at their office. So one of the things that you can do in Google Analytics is set up filters. You can go to what is my IP address, you just Google that and you can add in your IP address so that you know that when you're looking at your analytics and your metrics that you're not accounting for the people in your company that are looking at the website, plus any agencies that you're working with or other partners that would be frequently visiting the website. That would be the first thing that I would recommend. Secondly, especially with e-commerce, a lot of companies don't take the time in Google Analytics to set up advanced e-commerce. And when you do that in analytics, it gives you so much more data of what's happening in the checkout process. You can see when people add to cart, when they abandon cart, when they make it completely through the checkout process. And you can just get this more visual picture of what's happening with your cart so that you can troubleshoot and figure out where people are falling off and in the end increase that conversion rate.
Interesting. So that's a setting within Google Analytics or like a piece of Google Analytics that you can activate. Is that
exactly? Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think sometimes like people often only look at data after the fact. It's like they're only thinking about the data once they have all of the numbers in front of them, and then they try to have it make sense. And one of the things that we try to talk to clients about are it's really sort of two-part. One is to figure out your questions first, and then configure your dashboards and your data collection and data hygiene and things like that to help you answer those questions, as opposed to just looking at the data and randomly starting to come up with questions. So there's that kind of planning piece of it that I think is really important. And that takes a little bit of time and headspace to try to figure out like, what is it here that I really want to know? Are there a few like common questions that you think e-commerce companies should be asking their data?
Well, I think number one, you want to be able to benchmark your data so that when you are, it's so funny, you say data, I say data.
Yeah.
Data.
Tomato.
So when you're looking at your data, that you are able to compare it so that, like, say you're running an ad campaign and you want to mark in Google Analytics, you can write notes and annotations in your analytics for when you start certain ad campaigns, so you can test and compare. I think like the data is this like moving organism, and the more you can create habits in your company to measure and benchmark these data points, for most companies, monthly makes sense. Weekly may make more sense for a company. It will start to help you figure out where your rhythms are and where your red flags are.
Very cool. I always learn something from you. I had no idea that you could make annotations when campaigns start. Like we usually like know when they start and, we'll kind of know when we're looking at data, but I didn't realize you could actually like mark it in, which would be so helpful when you're going back historically to know like, oh, what was the effect of this campaign last year and what are our expectations this year, to not just guess, oh, it looks like it started right around here because we saw a spike, to actually know it started on this date and maybe it took a couple of days to ramp up. And so we should expect that this year, or we'll try to close that gap this year. So that's really cool.
It's so helpful, especially like if you get some good PR and you have this huge spike in your analytics, and then 2 years later, you're like, oh, I wonder what that was from. Like,
Yeah.
have that all annotated in Google Analytics. And, same thing, like you launch a new homepage or redesign the product page, like marking those in analytics will help kind of paint the picture of the story behind what's happening with the data.
Very cool. And I think that the other piece that we tend to talk to people about is to try to find data points that are sort of like more like leading indicators, so that you're not always looking at like campaign history or the history of your efforts at the point when you really can't affect it. So that not only should you be benchmarking kind of early and often, but also try to look at, okay, like if we're getting a spike in traffic, then we can start to expect a spike in sales, and then try to figure out like, is this happening? Is this correlation happening, and how long does it take, and things like that, as opposed to, run a campaign for a few months and then go back after it's all over and say, oh, well, that wasn't successful. It's like, I think one of the benefits of having real-time data and using it in a more real-time way is that you don't have to wait until it's over. It really doesn't take that long before you start to know this is getting traction. And in a way, with a lot of campaigns, you don't want it to run very long when it's not working, because the platforms themselves will stop serving it as much, because they want to put out the campaigns that are going to get a lot of clicks, because that's where they make their money, right? So I think yeah, just like not waiting too long, and kind of having some leading indicators about how we know that this campaign will be successful, will give us the sales. What are those early indicators that we'll be looking for, so that we know if we don't hit these benchmarks, we need to take some action quickly. And
Yeah, that reminds me of one of the reports that I think is really interesting in Google Analytics is the time to purchase, whether it's time in days to purchase or the number of visits to purchase, kind of tracking how long it takes customers to buy, or how many times they need to come back to the website to make that purchase. And that can, you can use that data combined with when you're seeing traffic spikes to predict when you'll see those influx of sales, whether it's going to be the next day, the same day, or in some companies, it's like 6 months out where it's a really considered purchase. Like you think about furniture, people don't just land on a landing page for a couch and then check out. It's revisiting, comparing, and shopping. And that's all really helpful information to know when, even especially if you're like running a Facebook campaign for a couch, like you have to wait that much longer out if you know that your customer doesn't buy until 6 months out to be able to determine if that campaign was actually successful or not.
Right. Yeah, that you could accidentally make a decision too early and shortcut a successful campaign by expecting something that's just not realistic from the type of purchase or your type of customer or the way you have things set up. So yeah, I think that's definitely really, really interesting. We've also, I think one of the other things that I think small businesses struggle with a lot is how to, like, I can't pay for a huge research study, or how do I kind of build they like the idea of research and data based, but when it comes to like the investment to do it, that's kind of where people sort of double clutch, is like, like, I think it's just easier and cheaper if I just start doing stuff and kind of learn as I go. And especially with entrepreneurs, like, that's kind of how we like to operate, right? It's like, we'll figure it out. But I think that people also overlook some like really easy ways that they can get data. Like, if you have an email list, you can survey your customers. And I think people, I often hear people say like, oh, I think our customers do X. And it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, if you're saying you think, you need to ask them. And I know we've, seen brands do that in some really interesting ways. There was a brand that I was looking at, or actually a colleague of mine was looking at a couple of weeks ago, called Eat Your Coffee. It's a Boston-based brand, and they were doing a lot of sales. It's basically like a caffeine bar, and they started selling direct to consumer on their own e-commerce website. And so they actually had sorry, they were not selling directly to customers on their e-commerce website. They were selling to Amazon. And one of their issues was that they didn't have direct customer contact. So they started putting, they took their top 200 Amazon customers and wrote handwritten notes in the fulfillment. And so they like created the kind of mailing list and incentivized those top 200 customers to complete a survey, and gave them some branded swag in exchange, to get their insights on, like, how did they get caffeine fix before they found their product, and how does the product fit into their day, and just some simple questions. And one of the things that they found was they found this like 83-year-old woman who was totally not who they thought their target demographic was, who had acid reflux and couldn't drink coffee. And she was a total super fan of their product because they helped her get her caffeine fix when she literally like needed to eat her coffee, like she couldn't drink it. And so up until that point, they hadn't been marketing the product as a coffee replacement. They had only been kind of marketing it more as like an energy bar. And so we're starting to think about like, oh, maybe this could actually be a target market for us in the future that we weren't thinking about. And they didn't have to pay, all outdoors for a complex like market research study. They just had to be a little bit creative about like, how do we get access to our customer base? If you're doing e-commerce yourself on your website, you already have a lot of that information and you can just email those folks. But even if you're going through Amazon, there's still opportunities to kind of use offline fulfillment touch points to reach them. And I just think it's a great example of like where they could use market research. It created some like really unexpected insights, and it helped them kind of like build and expand their market base in a way that they just never would have if they hadn't asked the questions.
Interesting. Yeah, I know Amazon has some strict rules about marketing to Amazon customers. But I think that's a good example of a company that was creative and working around the rules.
Yeah, well, I think like the piece was that they also like weren't soliciting sales. They were just like thanking that, kind of like including a thank you note, and could you complete a survey? And so it was a workaround. And also I know Amazon's been kind of even more like, as more and more brands go there, been cracking down on that more. But I think that there are ways to be creative and work around it. And and even if it's like having your team do research to get email addresses or to get mailing lists and putting a little bit of sweat equity into it, it could definitely pay off. But if you already have an email list and you already know your customers, then you don't even have the kind of like Amazon excuse not to do it. So
I can't remember if we talked about this earlier, but what we've been finding with a lot of our clients that have sent out surveys is that during COVID, people have been much more likely to take the time and give their feedback and respond to a survey. So I think it's a great recommendation to reach out to customers more and get their feedback. It's just so helpful to hear customers talk about your business in their own words.
Yeah, and I think especially if you have those kind of like super users, super buyers, they're the kind of people who would be happy with like some, a sticker or, some kind of simple branded swag, and just to be asked their opinion in not just a like, um, why do you buy us type of way, or are you happy with your purchase, but in more of like an exploratory, like help us build our brand way. Like, we noticed you and we want your input because we value you as a customer. I think that that's an interesting way to approach it, because I think people love to be seen, and the idea that they feel it'll only make them more passionate about the brand to be asked. And we found that we have our brand development program, Solve for Why, includes a lot of like internal and external surveying up front. And one of the things that we find when we're doing those surveys is that we'll actually we will ask a question, usually like, what's your favorite thing about this company or this brand? Why do you like them? Why are you a customer? And more than once we've had the response of, because they care about me enough to do things like this, to send me a survey like this, to ask these questions. And I think sometimes we feel like we don't want to bother customers. And I feel like it's almost the opposite. Like, they feel happy and almost like honored that that you're asking their opinion and that you're valuing it.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Any other like tools? I know you guys, you might have even mentioned it last week, that you use like some dashboard tools to look at data. Are there kind of visual ways that you feel like are more useful, or tools that people should know about when they're thinking about how to use data more effectively?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned the last time we used Dash This for our dashboards because you can integrate social metrics and social ad campaigns really well along with your core analytics and e-commerce data. So that tool has been really helpful. Um, I guess I just wanted to kind of like bring home the point again. It can be so overwhelming to like look at all of those metrics in one dashboard and be like, how do I make sense of this? And I think like the more that you can bring it back to your strategic initiatives at your company, even looking at like, what is a better metric, the number of people coming to our site, or the number of new visitors coming to our site, or the number of existing customers coming to your site. Like, each of those three data points has a very different meaning depending on what your overarching strategy is. So, even like when you're composing these dashboards, to kind of group it by, these are the numbers we care about because of this reason, and these are the numbers we care about because of that reason. And it will help you kind of like see a little bit clearer for what are the numbers that pop out as like, oh, we need to do something about that one.
Yeah, that's a great point, to really be thinking about your numbers based on your goal. Like, these are the numbers that are telling us how we're tracking to X goal, that's a company wide, or a marketing goal, or, a department goal. I think that also helps too, like, again, depending where you are in your company, also helps people get more aligned on data. Because I think certain people have emotional reactions to different kinds of data. And I think it also helps create like a cohesive company narrative, team narrative about, this is why this is important and why we don't measure this and why we do measure this. Sometimes knowing, what you're not looking at is as important as knowing what you are looking at. And, great. So I know one of the things that we had talked about early on was like do we even want to hold this YouTube live? Really in the aftermath of the death of George Floyd, and thinking about, everything that's sort of going on in our country right now, and the dialogue there is sort of like, does anybody really care about branding and e-commerce now? And does it feel inappropriate to talk about it? And we decided to go ahead, but I just also kind of wanted to both acknowledge that it is going on and just kind of open up space to just talk a little bit about, we're both leaders of small businesses, and have, reach in our communities. And so I'm just curious, like, what have you been doing, thinking about, talking about with your team right now?
Yeah, it's been a really heavy week, and yeah, just so many feelings, anger and frustration and compassion, and it's been a lot to process. And I feel like, again, it's like going through COVID. It's just another example of like, when, like, hey, listen up, it's time to lead right now. Like, you and I are CEOs, like, we have a voice, and like, this is our chance to make a difference and speak up. So I've been really mindful about speaking and talking and trying to share as much as I can. And maybe in the past I may have thought something but not said something, and like, I just want to be a white ally for Black Lives Matter and be active in being an anti-racist. And I thought I would share a little bit about what I posted on LinkedIn yesterday for what IBEC's doing. One of the things that I realized I need to get better at is my education about racism and inequality. So 3 books that I'm reading, I just started with Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson, and How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. I'm going to be reading those books, and I've also told all of our IBEC team members that any books that they want to read on inequality and racism, that IBEC will reimburse them for those purchases. Personally, I've made donations to the Equal Justice Initiative and the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. And IBEC has donated to Black Lives Matter, and is also supporting this company in Portland called Little Chair Press, and they're printing free Black Lives Matter t-shirts and posters. And we're, I really, want to create the space at IBEC and create the space for dialogue so that we can talk about it. And it's not something that's like silently happening, like outside of work. Like, I think this is something that needs to be a continuous conversation. So I'm actively looking for ways that I can incorporate it into our staff discussions. And yesterday I was just really wowed by the team. They worked together to put together a statement for our website, and Sabrina, our designer, shared her photos from the protests, and like, just everyone worked together to make this statement to support Black Lives Matter and racism and inequality justice. So that's what I'm doing, and I really, I'm trying to talk about it with as many other business leaders as possible. And I think, as we need to be white allies, and we need to be vocal about it.
Yeah. And I think that there's also a combination of that, like talking and then also listening. I feel like it's sort of also one of the things that I've, really am trying to commit myself to do, is to really seek out more diverse voices, whether it's in my social feed, and whether it's, in, groups that I'm in and things like that, and just making sure that I'm listening deeply to Black voices, and making sure that 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 their perspective is valued and brought to the table and really deeply heard. Because I feel like one of the things that, you know, is sort of in the back of my mind and all this is like, oh, please, like, don't have this just be like this moment in time where everybody does this like social media show of solidarity and then it kind of like trickles away. You know, how do we really make some decisions that help, you know, deal with some of the more systemic kind of fabric pieces of what we're doing. So I think that this is both an opportunity to like speak up now and also be kind of considering the long haul. Like what are the foundational changes that we need to make in ourselves, in our companies, in our communities, and how do we listen deeply and be responsive in ways that are going to move us forward? Because, you know, I think I keep feeling like 2020 needs to be the year that we all look back on and say like, wow, this was a terrible year, but it was the year that so much started to change, you know. And I feel like if we can do that, then we're doing something. If we look back on it, was like, oh yeah, we did that, but nothing really came of it, then it almost feels like all this like pain and frustration and fear, you know, that's just gone on, you know, in the past few months in so many different ways. It's like I want to make it mean something and I want to make it stick and have a lasting impression. So yeah, like a lot of what we're talking about, I mean, we're producing more and more content now and kind of talking about different brands and what brands are doing. And so one of the things we're trying to do is also like feature more Black owned brands and businesses and kind of like amplify like what they're doing and creative, you know, Black creative voices, writers and designers that might otherwise be overlooked in all of this. And really, you know, just kind of like do our best to again like add our voice in solidarity, but also really like amplify the voices of people who have not been heard for so long and who, you know, I think that we're just seeing that kind of like outpouring of frustration and anger and all of that stuff because there has been so much like silence. And so yeah, it's not easy, but I think you know, in kind of like our imperfect ways, just to kind of, you know, as you said, like keep trying, keep talking about it, and keep, I think, examining ourselves as leaders and kind of say like, am I doing enough? Am I doing all I can? What else can I do? And leave room and space for the people in our team to also have um, growth and dialogue, and just make sure that, yeah, we're not isolating work and life, because that's just not not the way things are. So but I appreciate you speaking openly about it and catching us up on what you guys are doing. It sounds like you're taking some good steps and having some good conversations, and yeah, we will.
It'll be a process.
Yeah, definitely a process. And but I feel also like it's a great opportunity to be a leader. You know, it's one of the things that makes me feel very fortunate to say like, hey, I actually am in a position to make a difference and to start to change some things. And I think realizing, you know, our own impact and like the potential impact that we can have is half the battle, not just sitting back and just feeling helpless, which I know, you know, can be kind of that initial gut reaction of like, oh, this is too big, there's nothing I can do. But yeah, we've seen countless times that that's not the case. So anyway, I appreciate you and appreciate the conversation as always. So thanks so much, Becky.
Fun.
All right.